Hey, Terrence, how you doing? Can you hear me? You can hear me? Awesome. Okay. So yeah, we've been needing to do another debate for a while now, so this is great. I liked your debate that I saw. I think that your opponent missed some opportunities, and so I wanted to talk about that from my perspective on this issue. And I know we talked about this a little bit on Facebook and everything. But with that being said, I'm going to start with the basic definition. I liked your definition from Merriam-Webster, and mainly I'm going to focus on the points C and D, which were the definition of hero being a person admired for achievements and noble qualities, or one who shows great courage. I think both of those things do apply to Edward Snowden. So I have two overall points I'm going to give here. The first one is that Snowden's actions required great courage. Interestingly enough, Snowden has actually been threatened with execution by Donald Trump, and conservatives all over the place have been very upset with any of his actions. And the overall point is when he was releasing information, he was going against the government, the same government that he was saying was watching everyone and that anything they did, they would be tracked. So he was going up against an organization who he already knew could completely destroy him. In so doing, he was forced to flee the country, away from his home, away from his girlfriend, away from his previously successful life at home. Choosing to do that in order to let the American people know about the abuses going on is incredibly courageous. He sacrificed his entire life to do what he believed was right. So the second contention I have is that Snowden's actions have had great effects. The Electronic Frontier Foundation published a piece talking about how there were 65 pieces of information that were exposed about how the US was illegally spying that we did not previously know about and would not have known about or been able to change had Snowden not taken action. One of the things that we learned was that the NSA actually already had an internal document saying they were fully aware of the fact that they, in the last year, had violated 2,776 court orders. There was also evidence that the US government was destroying evidence against itself that would have hurt it in court cases. That information actually led, including the fact that the Obama administration had misled the Supreme Court in United States in Clapper versus Amnesty International. And so when it was found out that that information had been misleading, the case was dismissed for lack of standing. So the United States, I mean, there were clear changes that happened then. For instance, the USA Freedom Act was the first legislation to rein in NSA spying in over 30 years directly because of Snowden. His actions had clear benefits for the United States.
Okay, so in this debate, to anyone who is judging, I would implore you to stay with facts and actual evidence, not conspiracy theories. We have to throw out all biases out the window and actually judge this debate as objective as possible. Okay, so fact one, we have an NSA contractor, Edward Snowden, left the country with downloaded classified information. After this, Congress did an investigation. Fact two, after the investigation was complete, there was both a classified and unclassified release of the findings in this investigation. Fact three, heroes represent what we consider to be the best things about us as a society. Their actions are selfless, never putting others in harm's way for their beliefs. Their actions inspire us. This is what makes them a hero. Now I'll move on to definition. So my opponent here has already talked about he sides with my definitions, but just for the sake of the audience, okay, Merriam-Webster, it was 4 definitions. A mythological, we both agreed, mythological, yeah, that's... Okay, second was illustrious warrior. Third, a person admired for achievement and noble qualities. And 4, one who shows great courage. Okay, so I suspect my opponent is going to hit you with all kind of craziness in my opinion, that Snowden showed great courage, which makes him a hero. To counter that, I will simply say this. Whistleblowers show courage. They show courage because they don't fly off to non-extraditionary countries. And then when they are safe from prison time, carelessly release the information to the untrained media. Under the law, publicly revealing classified information does not qualify someone as a whistleblower. In order to be a whistleblower, one must show fraud, waste, abuse, or other illegal activity to an appropriate law enforcement agency. For example, law enforcement oversight personnel, which include congressmen, senators, or the FBI, all of which have public lines for reporting crimes. Once they report wrongdoing to law enforcement, they are then guaranteed protection from retribution as a whistleblower. So in order to not need to flee the country, all he had to do was report it to law enforcement. This should raise the question, why was his first thought after finding the government was illegally spying to download classified information and flee the country? Which brings me to fact 4. The congressional report revealed that the vast majority of the 1.5 million documents he stole have nothing to do with programs impacting individual privacy interests. They instead pertain to military defense and intelligence programs of great interest to American adversaries, all of which were posted online for enemies of the U.S. and its allies to be able to access. And just because your head was down and I don't want to be messed up, I would say, and now I will pass it to Daniel.
Well, thank you for that, Terrence. So I think that overall, your perspective seems to be that because he left the country, that shows that there was a problem going on. I don't think you realize the reason that he left the country, which was because he was scared to death. And I've told you this, but you need to watch the documentary Citizen 4, because that actually shows you what he was doing throughout the time. Maybe you did watch it in the time since I told you that last night, but that'd be interesting. But I'm not sure if you did. Well, you can tell me if you did or not. But you should watch it just so you can see what his mind frame was, what he was going through. And one of the things that you find really interesting about that documentary is they do a really good job of showing his face looking to the window. The man is scared. And really, he had good reason to be scared of that, because he was pointing to all these things that the United States was doing that were completely against international law. They were against domestic law. They were against the Constitution. And so the fact that he was revealing them could have gotten him charged with treason. And that's part of the reason why he then had to flee, because he would not have been protected, because the United States could have easily charged him with treason for that. So the whistleblower protections were not going to apply to him, so he had to run away. Now let's talk about, you said that whistleblowers show courage because they don't run off. I would say that he actually showed even more courage because he was willing to go even more than a typical whistleblower. The only way to expose this was to let out the information, and then he was going to be charged with treason if he did so. So he not only exposed information like a whistleblower does, he also exposed information and did not even get the protection that a whistleblower normally gets. So he did more and had more courage than your average whistleblower. You talked about how the vast majority of the information had nothing to do with the actual spying itself. But what they did show was how the information was being collected by these intelligence agencies, which was what he had to release in order to show what was going on. You had to show the whole picture of what exactly was being taken. So yes, there were millions and millions and millions of things that the government was tracking of the American citizens, most of which were already illegal. But there were only a few programs themselves that were causing this. But the actual data itself was millions and millions of records. Snowden wasn't releasing the millions of records as much as he was simply saying, here's what's going on. You can see it by looking at this. So overall, he was being incredibly courageous with what he was doing, and he released information that was incredibly useful to the United States people and to the people all over the world. And I can talk about that more in a little bit here too.
You sorry? Why did you have to pass? I needed 3 more seconds before you pass it. But okay. All right. So I'm going to go off notes and just a little bit of background about myself and my friend Daniel. Daniel says my biggest weakness is when somebody flusters me and make me go off notes. So right now, I'm actually about to go off notes right now. Okay, so this is what I want to say. Okay, so what you're doing right now is like you're ignoring a lot of stuff. Okay, so in my first debate on the same topic, I brought up the fact that almost as soon as Snowden got the job as a contractor for the NSA, that he started downloading material. That's what the investigation found. So that means almost as soon as he got the job, he started downloading stuff, which is a little makes you say why did he, as soon as he got the job, he started illegally downloading stuff. Then second is the fact that at no point did he actually try to go through the proper channels to make himself So the whole thing with him being that he was worried for his life, that's in the military we call that a self-inflicted wound. That means he did that to himself. At any point when he found out that the government was doing something illegal, he could have reported that to Congress. He could have reported that to senators. He could have reported that to the FBI. He could have reported that to anybody, but he didn't. Instead, he took his little bag. You know the saying, he took his ball and went home. He downloaded the information, got on the plane, flew to Hong Kong, and then he started releasing stuff. The mere fact that of the stuff that he downloaded, majority of it had nothing to do with the U.S. spying on U.S. people and stuff like that, and that he released that release, the most important thing for me, while you're dwelling on the part that he released stuff and it showed to the U.S. citizens that the military, that the NSA was spying on the citizens, that's only one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that the improper release of stuff. And you and I talked about the fact that the New York Times, in their improper redaction of statements, led to NSA operatives their names being released and what they were doing. Okay, like I said, the important thing about that is he could have properly have redacted the information and only released information that had to do with the United States spying on its citizens. Instead, he didn't. Instead, he released a shotgun blast of a whole bunch of top secret information and released it to people who had no idea what to do with classified information. And doing that, he put American service members in danger. And as an American service member, I can't let that go. That's not just something that I could just say, oh, well, at least he let the Americans know that the NSA was spying on them also. Pass.
Okay, so first of all, you said that as soon as he got the job, he started downloading things. Well, if you talk to him about that, as he's himself said, the reason for that is because he was so shocked by what he saw and how the government was abusing their own citizens, how they were violating our constitutional rights. And so he realized, wow, I need to do something about this. And he started downloading things so that he could make a difference. You talked about how he needed to go through the proper channels. Well, I have a basic response to this, which was that there were no proper channels. There was no way to actually get this out. If you actually look at his contract with Booz Allen, it says, quote, report all suspected violations of the law, but take care to not report a violation to someone you believe is involved in the matter, end quote. Well, everyone who Edward Snowden worked for, from Booz Allen to Congress to the Senate to the NSA, the entire US government, all the way up to Obama, was involved in this. There is no one who he can go to about this. You can't report that suspected violation of the law when they are part of the problem themselves. This is part of the reason he was so scared for his life, because by releasing this information, he was going to be charged with treason, which Donald Trump himself has even said, charge him with treason and kill him. And that's what you see. I mean, the man had a legitimate reason to be terrified, because this was something where everyone was involved. And the only way to expose that was to get rid of the information by going around the governments and going to some other organizations, such as the media. You then talked about how this was only one aspect of the release. My response is context. In order for you to understand what was there, you had to see all the information that the United States was collecting, how they were doing it, and what it was doing. In that context, people were able to see, okay, this is how they are going about their illicit activities. Then you talked about how it had undermined a few NSA operatives. Well, my first response would be that of no deaths. Not one person died as a result of this. A few people had their cover blown a little bit, but it didn't actually lead to any negative consequences on that. Secondly, if that's what it costs to catch the United States government violating the constitutional rights of the citizens, then sure, I absolutely will take that. The real issue here that you're trying to distract from is the fact that the United States was violating the rights of citizens and the rights of those in other countries. They were spying on foreign leaders, who are even our own allies. That had to be exposed. And the only way to do so is to release the evidence saying this is what's going on. And that's what Snowden did. And by so doing, he put himself at risk. And this is the thing. That is the definition of a hero, someone who's willing to sacrifice himself to help the people.
Oh, I'm going to love this one. Let's mark this 14 minutes in. Okay, so my opponent just said that in talking about the cover blown of the NSA operative and stuff like that, he said, I'll absolutely take that. That is a true statement right there of someone who has never served. Okay, so I want to bring this out. Okay, so my opponent just said that he'll completely take that. So when we're talking about a hero and stuff like that, you're saying Edward Snowden was in a position that he can say, you know what, though it may put service members who are serving in third world countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and stuff like that, I am willing to put their lives in danger so that I can release this. Edward Snowden is not in the position, nor will he ever be in the position to actually be able to make that. I'm pretty sure when I signed up for the Army, at no point did I sign up and there was a clause on there that said NSA operative at some point may be able to release my name and what I'm doing and my actions and put my life in danger. Okay. And all of this is really one of those ends justify the means type of things that my opponent is saying. Okay, so what he wants to say is that the ends of Edward Snowden being able to release that the United States government was illegally spying is worth Edward Snowden then putting the lives of service members in danger. And that right there, you and I will never see eye to eye on that, because whether it's one service member, a million service members, because as I said in the discussion board, in a little post I put, that for every NSA operative, there are about 20 soldiers, about 20 Marines that are securing them. So as much as some people would like to believe that there's some satellite and the satellite is only the way that we are getting it, that we are getting this intel in like Iraq and Afghanistan, no, these are people on the ground there. And by Edward Snowden releasing exactly how the U.S. does that, it is putting the lives in danger. Yes, you can say we don't know whose lives, whether life was lost or not, but you know enough to know that their lives were put in danger. And if you don't believe that, then on my next turn, after this 41 seconds is over, I will go over and read the statements by General Dempsey and other NSA people that says that he seriously put service members who were in theater, their lives in danger by what he did. And this going back to this conspiracy theory that Edward Snowden had no complete ways to properly be able to release this, that his only option was to leave and go to a foreign country to release this. That is a conspiracy theory. That is a very definition of conspiracy theory, that everybody is involved. He could have properly released it, just the stuff that had the U.S. spying, and not put service members in danger. 2, 1, pass.
So he's calling this a conspiracy theory, and yet it's not. There is nothing about that is a conspiracy theory. If you actually read the documents themselves, if you actually look at what was released, you see that this was going with the entire US government. It was the NSA, it was the Attorney General's office, it was Obama. In fact, Senator Ron Wyden had been trying repeatedly to do things to get this changed, and nothing he was able to do was working, which is why Jennifer Healer wrote an article for Slate entitled, quote, "Sorry, Obama, there were no other avenues for Snowden's whistleblowing," in which she says, quote, "Over the course of 6 years, Senator Ron Wyden employed virtually every legal means he could think of to try to curb the NSA's secret surveillance authority and or bring it to light. But just as it's next to impossible to get reporters to write about a program you can't tell them about, it's awfully hard to win a legislative debate against the intelligence community when its members get to publicly contend that passing a bill will hurt national security while you can't offer a shred of evidence to the contrary. If a U.S. senator acting within the rules wasn't able to force a real debate on the NSA's surveillance authority, what chance did a 29-year-old contractor have?" End quote. So the point is, the United States was making this impossible for anyone to actually change something. There was no evidence, so there was no way to legally do this. The only way to actually bring this to light is to leak the evidence. That's what Snowden did. There was no legal avenue. The only avenue was the one that Snowden went about, which put his own life at risk. He had to sacrifice his home, his well-being. He had to run out of the country. He is still expelled from the United States and is unable to come back. He wants to. If you listen to his interviews, he wants to come back to the United States, but he can't. There was no legal avenue here. Now, my opponent talks about how it put service members at risk. I have a couple responses. My first response is it didn't. There was not one person who was actually killed. There were a couple of them who were put into situations of a little bit of discomfort, but it did not actually lead to any deaths. Secondly, it wasn't him. It was the media who hadn't actually revealed things as well as they could have. But if you don't want that, then give him a legal avenue to get it out. Like, for instance, the government. The problem is the government was the problem. You can't say, oh, he's got to do it through the government when the government is the thing he's exposing. There's just no way that makes sense. The third response is that of hundreds of millions of Americans. There were hundreds of millions of Americans and people all around the world whose constitutional and or international rights were being violated by the government looking into them, watching their cell phone records, watching their texts, watching their sex, watching their porn activity. All of these are there. The United States was spying on foreign governments' cell phone records. It was absolute violation. This had to be released. And this was the only way it was possible to release it.
Okay, so Daniel, my buddy, this is where I'm planting my flag. And I'm letting you know this is where I'm planting my flag, and this is where probably the most of my stuff is going to come from after this. It is on the fact that, which is the improper release, and we're talking about the New York Times thing. So let me run through this right quick. So in March 2014, Army General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said the vast majority of the documents that Snowden exfiltrated from our highest level of security had nothing to do with exposing government oversight of domestic activities. The vast majority of those were related to our military capabilities, operations, tactics, techniques, and procedures. In February 2015, NSA Director Admiral Michael Rogers said that Snowden's disclosures had a material impact on the NSA's detection and evaluation of the terrorist activities worldwide. In April 2000, so you know where I'm going with this. So all those, and the last one I want to hit on is one of the New York Times publication of leaked NSA documents. They failed to properly redact the PDF it uploaded, exposing the name of the NSA agent who composed the presentation, as well as the name of the targeted terrorist cell, which was Al-Qaeda's operation branch in Mosul, Iraq. Okay, so the reason why I'm bringing it up, and the reason why I say that's where I plant my flag, is this. Okay, so when we're talking about a hero, and we're talking about selfless, and we're talking about he put his own life at risk. Not only did he put his own life at risk, but he put the lives of others at risk. So by you saying that no lives were lost, but they were made uncomfortable in Iraq, uncomfortable in Afghanistan, uncomfortable in a third world country while you're doing something to try to sneak and get intel, is not the same kind of uncomfortable like it's cold in your house and there's no blanket. No, you're talking about these people because, as you know, Al-Qaeda, Iraqis, everybody else that knew that the U.S. was spying on them. And once this report came out, when they changed their techniques, they found out that exactly how the Americans were spying on them. Once they did this did put their lives in danger. So pardon me if, it seems like no actual life was lost, but it was just saying they're uncomfortable is acknowledging, but trying to sugarcoat the fact that this put their lives in danger. Okay. So, and then when you're talking about the media, the person who was properly trained was Edward Snowden to deal with classified material. The person who was responsible for it, this classified material, was Edward Snowden because he illegally downloaded it. He had the responsibility of making sure this classified material was properly vetted and properly redacted before handing it off to the media. You don't hand a 5-year-old a gun and then them shoot themselves or shoot somebody else, then say it's their fault because they had the gun. No, it's the responsibility of the person who bought the gun. Likewise, it was Edward Snowden's responsibility to make sure that this material was properly taken care of before he handed it out for public dispersion.
Did the American people have a right to know that they were having their constitutional rights violated en masse by the United States federal government?
He could have did this only revealing the way that the U.S. was spying on the people in the United States. He did not need to reveal the military capabilities, the operations, and the tactics, techniques, and procedures of service members in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Syria.
So I'm taking that as a yes, that he did need to reveal information. You just wish he hadn't done it the way he did?
It's not about I wish. It's about, while you're trying to say this person's a hero, The hero has to look at the total scope of everything. And you can't say he's a hero because he released this, but completely forget the fact that he put the lives of thousands of other Americans who are operating in theater, their lives at risk. You can't say these lives are more important than those lives.
But you're not actually answering the question. How was he supposed to get this information out? How do you do this? We've talked about this. The government was the agency who he was reporting on. How does he report to the government? Oh, hey, you're doing abusive things, and hope that that's going to change anything.
I repeat once again, General Martin Dempsey. The vast majority of the documents that Snowden exfiltrated from our highest levels of security had nothing to do with exposing government oversight of domestic activities. The vast majority of those were related to our military capabilities, operation techniques, and procedures. If Edward Snowden releases only the materials that expose government oversight of domestic activities, you and I aren't having this conversation. It's the fact that majority of the stuff that he stole, majority of the stuff that he released had to do with the military capabilities of the country. And then he released those things in public to Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and Russia that we're having this conversation.
So nothing was released to other countries. They were released to the American media. And then because the American media released it in a way that was not very protected, it was able to be uncovered in certain elements by foreign governments. But no, he did not release it to foreign governments. Let's actually talk about what some of the things included. Some of the things that were found were that the United States had been spying on the Brazilian president, who canceled a state dinner with the United States because it had been exposed that they had been watching her private communications. It exposed that Angela Merkel had her private cell phone tapped. French President Francois Hollande complained about the U.S. having conducted vast surveillance against political and business figures in France. Mexican President Enrique Nieto and previous President Felipe Calderon had both been bugged as well. The UN and the EU had been spied on without their knowledge. All in all, over 35 world leaders, many of whom were US allies, had all been illegally spied on by the US. So when you talk about, oh, a lot of this information had nothing to do with domestic spying, yeah, but a lot of the information, the vast majority of it, had to do with how the United States was collecting data illegally around the world for what we claimed was for military activities. But really, how can you claim that tapping Angela Merkel's cell phone is a military activity? It's not. It is an abuse of human rights. This is why Amnesty International says, quote, when Edward Snowden shared U.S. intelligence documents with journalists in June 2013, he revealed the shocking extent of global mass surveillance. He showed how governments were secretly scooping up huge chunks of our personal communications, including private emails, phone locations, web histories, and so much more, all without our consent. His courage changed the world. He sparked a global debate, changing laws and helping to protect our privacy. Edward Snowden is a human rights hero, yet he faces decades in prison under charges that treat him like a spy who sold secrets to enemies of the United States, end quote. So all in all, we see that even if we go with your whole thing, oh, not all of it was about domestic spying. The point is, he was releasing information on how the government was violating the rights of people all over the world. This had clear benefits for the rest of the world, and you still haven't shown how there was any legal avenue to do anything except the way he did it. The only avenue that existed was to find a way to provoke the United States into change. That's what he did. Had he gone to the United States and said, hey, you're busy raping someone, change that. It's not going to do anything. You can't go to the offender. You have to go around and get actual change done. That's what Snowden did. That is why he is a hero.
So my opponent, hey, Daniel, look at your phone right quick. I sent you a text. Anyway, so I just want to say this, okay? So my opponent wants you to believe, as an audience, that Edward Snowden was forced to download 1.5 million things of data on the American country, on the NSA. Then he wants you to believe that Edward Snowden had no choice but to release all of it. Then he wants you to believe that he had no choice but to go to Hong Kong, then Russia. I'll say this. Why is it that Edward Snowden couldn't do the same thing? And let's say he had no way of exposing it except to go to Hong Kong and release it publicly. Okay, so why is it that he was unable to just only release the stuff that had to do with domestic, well, United States domestically? And then my opponent wants to tell you that he didn't release it to foreign countries. He only released it to media. No, he put it on the internet. Anybody who knows the internet knows that once you put it on the internet, that it is out there for anyone. And I'll only ask my opponent, and I almost ask my opponent. I won't, because I know for the sake of debate, he'll say something opposite of what he normally say. But I say, if he knew the way that the United States was handling stuff in Iraq and in Syria, and their ways they were gathering intel, would he feel comfortable posting that publicly on the internet? And for most Americans, they say no, they don't feel comfortable exposing and putting those operatives and those soldiers that are in harm's way in danger. But Snowden decided to do this, and like I said, to me, that's what a hero comes down to. Okay, so if you're going to say he's put his own life at risk, then only put his own life at risk. Don't improperly release something to the internet, to the world, to Al-Qaeda, to North Korea and everything, saying exactly how the U.S. are gathering intelligence. That right there is irresponsible. That right there just totally takes him out of the hero category. You can't say he's a hero because he exposed the U.S. right here, but at the same time, the same people you're saying that he cared for are the same people that he's putting the soldiers, the people on the front line, the 1% of the United States, he's putting their lives at risk. He's putting them in danger, but it's okay because he's doing something else also. It's kind of like I'm not going to go there. I was about to say another analogy, but I'm not. I'm trying to limit my analogies. But I'll say this, okay? Edward Snowden not only put his life at risk, but the lives of others, which takes him out of the category of being a hero.
If I walk in to my brother's room and I see him raping someone, he could criticize me for, oh, you didn't knock. But guess what? That's not the issue. There's a much bigger issue going on here. The same issue is true in this situation. Edward Snowden saw the government committing extreme abuses. Now, of course, my opponent wants to go, oh, you didn't go about it the right way. You should have knocked. Guess what? That's not the issue. The issue is that there was a complete abuse in how the United States was gathering information, both in the United States and in other countries. Our counterintelligence operations were abusive all across the board. We were violating the rights of our allies. We were violating the rights of our own people. And so what Snowden did was he did the only thing that was possible to get that information out. My opponent has given you no suggestions of how he actually could have gone about this legally, because in order to go about it legally, you had to go to the government. And the government was the problem in the first place. It would not have worked. There's nothing else that he could have done there. So overall, we have the question of, is Snowden a hero? I refer you back to the fact that the definition of a hero is someone who is admired for achievements and noble qualities. Snowden is that. His achievements are that he completely changed the world, recognizes the abuses of counterintelligence and how it is gathered against the rights of the citizens. That is a clear achievement that was only possible because of Snowden. Or the definition of a hero is that of one who shows great courage. Snowden has clearly shown great courage. Maybe my opponent doesn't like the way that he went around it, but he certainly put his own life at risk. He sacrificed his own ability to live in the country he cares about. He sacrificed the ability to have his girlfriend around it all the time. He sacrificed his successful life and job, and now lives on the run with half of America hating him. That's the definition of someone who has shown great courage. And why did he do that? He did it for us because we needed to know the abuses that our governments were committing against us and against the rest of the world.
So I'm going to end this like this in my closing comment. So you have to understand, while you're judging this, audience, I want you to understand this, okay? There's a very big difference between saying that Edward Snowden did a good thing by showing what the NSA was doing to the American people and considering him to be a hero. Doing a good thing does not necessarily make you a hero, okay? Second, you can't say because no one died as a result of his actions that makes him a hero. You can't say, let's make this clear. So I didn't get to all of my notes, but I'll say this, okay? Edward Snowden, in all his interviews after his releases, he's out of the airport. He's living in a Russian community. He's learning Russian. He is not suffering. So let's get this out of the way. He's not in a prison. He's not eating bread and water. He's just physically separated from his other family members. That is not suffering. Okay. And let's also talk about this. Whether it be the military, whether it be the NSA, whether it be Congress, all the report that labeled him as in for treason and everything was a bipartisan, 100%, a complete Democrat and Republican. Everybody said that what he did was wrong. Okay. And then my opponent wants to bring up that I didn't bring up exactly how he should have did it. This is what I'm saying. Okay. Let's say that Edward Snowden, I'll end it like this. Had Edward Snowden only released the stuff that had to do with exposing government oversight of domestic activities, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The mere fact that he downloaded and illegally released stuff that had to do with the military capabilities in our country's defense, that is a part that knocks him out of the hero category. You can't say he's a hero for protecting the country while also putting the country at risk. And by releasing the military capabilities, our operations that we have against Al-Qaeda and stuff like that, he did. He let Al-Qaeda know exactly what we were doing and how we were gathering information on them. So you can't say on one hand, I'm protecting the country while also putting them at risk at the same time. It's counterproductive. It's counter everything. And it's crazy. Like I said, like we never had this conversation about Chelsea Manning, who virtually did the same exact thing, who released stuff. We're talking about releasing classified information on our military.
All right. So first of all, with regards to Iraq and Afghanistan, an analysis by Flashpoint Global Partners found that there had been no change in terrorist activity as a result of the leaks. So that's simply false. And then when he talks about how Snowden should have only released the domestic stuff, we've already been over this, how the majority of the stuff he released, there was some of it that was about domestic spying, but a lot of it was also about our abuses overseas, how we were abusing international law and the rights of our allies and even their own leaders' cell phones. There were over 35 world leaders who we were spying on without their consent, even many of whom were our own allies. That is what needed to be released. That needed to be known. And so, yes, my opponent says, oh, he should have only released the domestic stuff. Well, we needed to know about this. The other countries had a right to know about our abuses, what our country was doing against international law. Finally, the first thing he said in that speech was that he's in Russia right now. He's learning Russian. He's not suffering. Well, my response is he's learning Russian and is under threat of execution if he returns to the United States, the country that he grew up in, the country that he actually wants to be a part of. Yeah, he's suffering. His own country is threatening to kill him because he stood up for their rights. Yes, Snowden is a hero. I will close with this quote from Shami Chakrabarti, who holds a JD from the London School of Economics and is the founder of Liberty, a British human rights organization, saying, quote, "Let me be completely clear. Edward Snowden is a hero. Saying so does not make me an apologist for terror. It makes me a firm believer in democracy and the rule of law. Whether you are for or against liberty, the people and our representatives should know about capabilities and practices built and conducted by our governments." End quote. I agree. I urge you to vote for the pro.
Just months after Snowden leaks, operatives of Al Qaeda and associated groups completely overhauled their 7-year-old encryption methods, which included homebrewed algorithms, adopting instead more sophisticated open source software and newly available downloads that enabled encryption. This is showing that Snowden's helped Al Qaeda to better defend against coalition forces. This was a report released in 2014 by the Massachusetts-based web